There was a young man, around the age of 22, who lived in Burlington, Vermont. He was a very good student, and rather an enthusiast when it came to seeking knowledge. The young man's intelligence always led him to have a realistic view on life. He wasn't someone who believed in anything supernatural, anything out of this world, or superstitious. To him, there was only one world, the one you could see with your own eyes and feel with your own hands, and the world for which there was strong scientific evidence. In short, he only believed in the empirical world. He would often hear about many strange and bizarre cases or experiences from people, even from his own family, but he always shrugged them off. He wasn't going to start believing in some entities which lacked evidence for their existence. Although, every time he would hear someone explain their experience to him, he would feel as if that person believed it to their very core. The young man was very fascinated by how so many people believed in the supernatural. Every time the young man would investigate any paranormal event that he heard of, his belief in a realistic and scientifically accurate world would become stronger than before. Like the time when the young man visited Hawaii for vacation with his family. As he was exploring the area, he came to know about a man whom the local people considered their hero. A tragic event had happened some time back when the police were investigating the whereabouts of an individual, Wilma Hathaway. Wilma's sister had been receiving calls from Wilma's husband that he had taken the life of his wife and that she was next. The police, however, was unable to find the remains of Wilma Hathaway, and of course, her husband was long gone. That's when Wilma's sister had taken the help of a person who called himself a supernatural detective, and he was very popular in the area. The supernatural detective had told her he had a vision in which Wilma was calling her from a body of water, and all she could specifically remember was the sign nearby that had an M on it. Surprisingly, as it was, after about a month, Wilma's remains were found buried on the coast of Molokai Island. A lot of people were now taking help from this supernatural detective, even the police, to solve the unsolvable mysteries. The young man was intrigued by how this supernatural detective could be so accurate, but after looking into the case himself, he was sure it was just a good prediction, and there was nothing supernatural about it. Of course, the body was going to be discovered near a body of water. Hawaii was an island, and knowing the police had searched the big island already and hadn't found a clue, the detective predicted the remains would be found on the nearest island that happened to start with an M, Molokai Island. It was also obvious. The young man was awestruck how superstitious people could be, and even the police. Then there was a time when an elderly man and his young daughter had opened a shop back in his hometown in Vermont. It wasn't long before rumors reached the young man about someone who could communicate with spirits from the other world. People around the town were visiting the elderly man and his daughter and paying them loads of money for his services, and a chance to speak with a loved one who had passed away. The young man didn't pay heed to such people. He knew they were all frauds. But when one of the young man's relatives visited his home and bragged about a session she took part in at the gifted young lady's shop, and that she was able to speak to a long-gone family member, the young man became fascinated to know more about what was going on. The young man kept an eye on the shop for about 2 weeks. He learned he had to make a payment with his name and address and schedule an appointment that would be held a week later. He was told he didn't have to identify who he wanted to communicate with, but he would have to bring a personal item of the loved one he wanted to communicate with. The session was always entertained by the elderly man's daughter. The young man had noticed that the elderly man would be missing from the shop at a certain time every day, so the young man booked an appointment a week later at a time when the elderly man wouldn't be around. The next week, the young man arrived at the shop with his personal item. He sat down and waited. He was surprised to meet the young woman, who was truly spellbinding. The young woman's name was Latvana. Latvana brought out a board carved with letters onto the table. She made the room dark and lit candles to create a gothic environment. Latvana began chanting some poetry, while the young man folded his arms and watched the scene. Suddenly, the table began to hover, and a small arrow that was placed on the table moved from letter to letter on the board and stopped on the letter H. Latvana said, "A loved one is trying to communicate with you. Put your hand on the table, on the cloth of your loved one. The spirit will communicate through your touch." The young man was impressed. "Yes, perhaps my father." Latvana closed her eyes, and the table hovered once again. She opened her eyes and said, "Your father says he is in a better place, and he wants you to be happy." The young man laughed out. "For sure, my father is in a better place. He's taking the day off and snoozing at home, and not wasting his precious time visiting a psychic." A week ago, when I submitted my information here, I didn't give my own name and address. I gave my friend's information. Your investigators, or rather your father, acquired information about my friend and his father. But here I am with the shirt of my own father. The young man got up and lifted the table as Latvana started yelling at him. "What are you doing? Get out of here!" The young man discovered a machine under the floorboard that kept raising the table, and a large magnet underneath the table that was being used to move the arrow from letter to letter. The young man chuckled and said, "The way I see it, you're in a pickle, and you don't want people to know this, do you?" before your taskmaster, your father, comes from his investigation of your next customer and everything becomes more complicated, I'm willing to let everything go. But of course, for a price. What do you want? What's your name? The young spellbinding girl blushed and replied, My name is Anna. Anna, you're amazing, and you can do much better with your life. Cut off the strings of the puppet master. The young man put some money on the table and said, This is for you. This should be good enough. The young man's price for not exposing the fraudulent business was Anna's freedom from this deceitful life. The young man often researched books on the supernatural world. He talked to people who claimed to know about this mystical world beyond ours. The young man soon came to realize most of these people he came across were all hoaxes or just had really good observation skills. But he was able to attain some interesting information from the numerous books he read, some of which he found in personal libraries or interesting individuals. His findings inspired him to continue his research, and he often ended up traveling far from home only to find an answer. After the young man graduated from college, he went from place to place seeking knowledge about the supernatural. It was one of these occasions that the young man happened to travel to Washington State. He took the opportunity to visit Cape Flattery, the northernmost tip of the state that viewed the Pacific Ocean. The experience was amazing, and so were the people he met there. During his travel around the area, the young man was hiking a trail through the forest, which led to the scenic view, when he came to know he was walking in a place that the local natives held sacred. By the time he had reached the coastline, it was near evening. He had made it in time for the sunset. He sat by the rocky shore and watched the beautiful sunset into the Pacific Ocean. While there was still redness in the sky, he decided to head back to his campsite before it got completely dark. That's when the young man noticed something that sparked his curiosity. It was a light in the distance. He assumed some people were holding their flashlights. But when he walked closer to the light in the trail of the forest, what he discovered amazed him. It was a ball of light which seemed to have its own mind, alive, hovering in the air. It seemed like the glowing ball of light turned around, saw the young man, and quickly turned back, and tried to escape into the forest to conceal its existence. Captivated by this strange sight, the young man started running after the glowing ball of light. The glowing ball flew through the forest, and the young man followed. Suddenly, the young man stumbled on a twisted root of a tree. He fell down on the ground and injured his head on a rock. He lay there on the ground, unable to focus on anything else except the immense pain he was feeling and the wetness of blood. Suddenly, the ground around him lit up. He saw the glowing ball was approaching him. The glowing ball came close to his head. And the young man was forced to close his eyes because of the brightness. All of a sudden, he felt his pain was decreasing. In a while, he had no pain at all. The bright light ceased and the young man opened his eyes. There was nothing around him anymore. He touched his forehead. He realized he didn't have the injury anymore. His forehead was absolutely healed. The young man was amazed at what had just happened. What was that glowing ball of light? The young man returned to his campsite. He went to bed and pondered about what he had experienced and soon drifted off to a sweet slumber. It was after this experience with the unusual glowing ball of light that something strange happened to the young man. Something had changed for him. He perceived the world differently. He was able to hear, see, and understand things that he wasn't able to do before. He could observe things that he couldn't observe before. The young man is better known today as Professor Reid. Professor Charles Reid.
If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to my channel and share this video with your friends and family.